Welcome back to another podcast of Cosplay Myths. Today's topic is about fabric, which leads to my first question. Deborah, why do we care about fabric? I mean, it's fabric.
Yeah, so fabric, obviously you need it to wear clothes, because what clothes are made out of is fabric. Now there's many different types of fabric, if that's more along the question of like, why should fabric type matter? In this case, it's because, do you really want a ball gown made out of fleece material or towels, that kind of material? So the fabric is very important.
All right. Yeah. So why is there an importance in the different types of fabric? Is there because as your example in your example, you were like, well, a ball gown made out of towels, for example. I mean, I have to admit that would be very impressive to pull off, but
it's not it. If you're going for like a joke kind of costume or something along something different, then yeah, go for it. I've seen people make dresses out of duct tape. So, it's not like the weirdest thing to happen on this earth. But yeah, no, whenever you're constructing a costume, you're gonna want to think about what kind of fabric you want to use. And there are many different types of fabrics. I know for those of us here in Alaska, our options are limited due to the fact that we only have like one fabric store that has a limited variety of fabric types. Whereas if you live in the lower 48, like Los Angeles, they have an entire district dedicated to fabric stores. It's known as the fashion district. And I know you probably think fashion district, why isn't that, dedicated to fashion? Well, it's mostly just fabric, honestly. I got the opportunity to go, was it 2 or 3 years ago now? And it's just blocks of just fabric stores. And they have everything from cotton blends, satin blends, to the weirdest furs you could find. And it's great. Whereas here in Alaska, we are more limited in our options. So we have your standard, there's cotton, satin, linen, silks, lace, just, yeah, we're unfortunately limited here.
I know, like, in previous podcasts, you've talked about how, like, fabric lays before. So I'm guessing that's a reason that there's an importance why you would use different types of fabric or material to build a costume.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. One second. Sorry, the world's driest lips today, apparently. Yeah, so when you're looking at like a skirt, depending on like the type of skirt you're going for, if let's just go with like a basic A line. So it's a skirt, it's an A essentially, and you want that to sit like that. So if you get cotton fabric, if you make it out of cotton or something thick like that, it will actually hold that shape a lot better. Whereas if you use satin, which is silk, kind of like, it's very similar to silk, just a little bit thicker, but it still has that nice sheen. That will actually lay flat. Whereas the only time you can really see it is when either you twirl or the movement of the skirt itself. So definitely when you're choosing your fabric type, you want to see how it essentially drapes and or lays. So that's definitely where one thing, again, fabric comes into play. The thicker the material, the more it's going to retain the shape that you give it. Whereas if the thinner, like again, silk, satins, lace, that stuff will drape the way it wants to drape, which is usually just flat.
Mm.
And if you look at certain patterns, actually on the back where the if you guys watched our last episode, where it has like the measurements and whatnot, at the top of it, there'll actually be a little margin that recommends the fabric types to use. Granted, you don't always have to follow those. I know I don't. It's recommended, but sometimes I just prefer something else entirely. but that will actually tell you like, okay, these ones will be either the simplest to work with and or will help retain the shape that you're looking for with this specific pattern. And so that's, again, that's one reason why it's really important to make sure you at least know your fabric types.
Yeah. So are there fabrics that are more difficult to work with? Just like cutting and measuring and just doing things with?
Yes, each fabric has its own little quirk, essentially. Whereas cotton is going to be one of your easiest ones to work with, just due to one, its versatility and durability, for one thing. Whereas if you're working with satin, that stuff frays. So if you ever see like a shirt and like that has like the stringy bits on the end that are like, it's fraying essentially. Satin does that very easily. It's a pain in the butt to work with if you're not familiar with it. And then also, I swear, I will measure that sucker out like 3 times. I'll pin it into place, and somehow when I sew it, it still moves. So the fabric didn't line up properly. And so it's not an easy fabric to use. Those who use it regularly, good for you. I can't. Which is funny because a lot of my stuff I use black satin for, and I regret it each time.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I like recently with the whole pandemic thing, I've been making masks with cotton. But so like Joanne's has been very low on cotton for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, no, cotton's like one of the thicker ones you can do, and again, it's much cheaper than like your most other fabrics, which is one reason why a lot of people go for it. But yeah, cotton, linen, and there was one other I can't remember the name of, but it's similar to cotton. It just has a different name. It's slightly more dense, so it doesn't move quite as easily. But those suckers are great for masks, just because it's more safe to use.
Yeah. So satin. It sounds like satin. Satin was it? That satin, is the most difficult to use, at least for you. Just because it has a mind of its own from the sounds of it.
Pretty much anything very thin like that, which actually I have some lace here with me. So anything, as you can see, so like here's lace. It's very standard, and like you see how, again, this is how like it drapes it. If you want to do it like this, it's just gonna go flat. Should probably hold this closer here. But whereas with like lace, or not lace, sorry, satin. So when you're trying to say like line up the edges, I don't know how well you guys can see this, but like you line up the edges, and again, whenever you sew, it likes to move. And it's the same thing with lace here. That problem can happen a lot, especially if you got one of the silkier laces. Anything that is silky likes to move. So you have to use 1,000,001 pins to pin it into place. I do know there are some seamstresses like I've seen on YouTube who are actually much better at doing it. I don't know what their tricks are, but they've figured out the secret to working with just very silky material like that. But it's definitely one of those ones that if you are new to sewing, avoid it if you can. I don't recommend it being a first-time fabric. It's going to be a huge challenge. And then on top of, you have to learn not just like, how do I keep the fabric from moving when I'm trying to sew it into place? How do I stop the fraying? How do I account for it does not stretch? It's not a forgiving fabric. So it's anything silky that it's going to be a challenge.
So what would you recommend a person to start on if they're like practicing how to sew things and how to make their own cosplays? Like we've talked about doing test runs with patterns before you've made like you use the actual fabric you're going to use. What would you recommend as the practice?
Definitely cotton. Cotton again is one of the easiest ones to work with. That's what I started out with. the seamstress who taught me the basics. Because cotton is so basic, it's also very versatile in what you want to do. And once you get more advanced skills, you can figure out how to get it to work the way you want it to. It's great for corsets, shirts, pants, hats, again, masks even. And because it has such that versatility, it's really great for, again, test runs. It's one of the cheapest materials also to get, so you don't have to worry about, spending $5 per yard, whereas it's usually anywhere from $2 to $3 per yard. Or even you can get the basic cotton sheets at like Village Inn or any of your thrift stores. Is it Village Inn or Value Village? Value Village, not Village Inn.
Village Inn is the food place.
You know what I'm talking about. Alaskans know this struggle. We have a restaurant called Village Inn, and then there's a thrift stop called Value Village. All of us, everyone I've ever talked to gets those two mixed up no matter what. But yeah, definitely recommend, like, if you can, go to a thrift stop, just buy some basic cotton sheets, use those as a test run, because you can get what's usually probably figured, those suckers are about anywhere from like 3, maybe even 4 yards of material right there. And you only spend like $7, maybe 8. The most I've spent is like $10, but those are really nice sheets. Yeah, no, it's just definitely just recommend cotton as your first time goer for test runs, things like that. It's very forgiving. It's when you have to, if you ever have to do it's called a seam rip, of where you go in and remove the seams with like a little needle thing. You don't have to worry about it, again, fraying at the seams right there. You don't have to worry about it tearing or just different things like that. Whereas with lace and satin, you have to pray to God that you don't mess up.
Yeah. So I've never worked with anything but cotton. I know my mom's worked with quite a few things, but that's her and me just being like, I am just the assistant. I have no idea what I'm doing. Don't ask.
And that's fine. I say, if you're, when you're learning cotton, again, it's so much easier. Don't do what I did, where I went straight from cotton to silk. That was a time. My very first cosplay was made out of satin. And that, nope, don't recommend it. Don't recommend it. I should have made that sucker out of cotton. It would have saved my life.
Yeah. So, as we do get into the topic of sewing, along with fabric also comes thread. Is there like, do certain fabrics get very picky about what threads you use? Or is thread and thread and thread? It's all just thread.
No, there is different types of threads. If you ever go to the fabric stores, they'll have a section. There's like all-purpose, high density. Then you got your silk threads as well. And each one will do all-purpose one. Generally, you can, again, it's all-purpose. You can use it for most things. But if you want something that is a little bit more durable, for if you're making, say, like a jacket, or you're using pleather or leather, you're gonna want the high density ones. Those ones are definitely much better for those kind of projects, and they're less likely to tear easily with the thicker the material. I'm not 100% sure what you use like the silk ones for. I've only ever used those for like if I'm doing embroidery projects. So I'm not too sure. I think those are meant for like not sergers, the embroidery machines. But hey, maybe the seamstresses use them for something else. I'm not too sure. But yeah, no threads.
I would have assumed like you use silk thread with silk material and then it all just is silky. But again, I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's fine. Yeah, no, you would, if following along the name, yeah, you would assume that would be the case. But if you use the silk thread, like on like a shirt or a dress, you're more likely to pop a stitch and have it come apart literally at the seams.
Oh, oh dear. So I'm
Yeah.
guessing silk thread is not designed to hold stuff together. It's just designed to look very pretty and be
As
silky.
far as my understanding is, pretty much, yeah. Um, Granted, I could be wrong. I'm not a trained professional, so I don't know. Again, I only ever worked with it for like only one project so far, and it's been an interesting experience with it, I will say. But in my experience with working with it, it's not very strong. It snaps very easily. So I don't see it being able to hold up a garment very well.
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
But it is pretty to look at.
Yes, no, I always have fun walking into like the fabric stores and looking at all the fabric and then just kind of looking at the thread and going, there's a difference here, and I don't know which one I'm supposed to get.
Yeah. Actually at the Joann's, I don't know if they still have it because the location on Diamond closed. So now it's over like Old Seward area.
Yeah,
Um,
it's in one big store.
yeah, they combined them, which was a little sad, but oh well. Um, but they used to have over on their thread a little booklet, and the booklet would describe the different types of thread and like what best material to use it for.
Mm-hmm.
Also, if you ever talk to any of the ladies at the cutting counters up here in Alaska, a lot of them are old seamstresses or seamsters, and they know what they're doing. Uh, I can't tell you the number of times I've talked to some of the ladies at the cutting counter and just being like, "Hey, um, I'm confused. Can you help me with this?" And
Mm-hmm.
usually it's one of like the little old ladies. I love them to death. I used to work with some of them. And they would immediately go into like grandma mode and being like, "Oh, honey, sweetheart, come here. Let me show you." Okay, she's like, "Okay, you want this one, not that one." She's like, "If you're not used to this, don't do that." And just they usually like 9 out of 10 times they know what they're doing. Even like some of the younger generations that work at the Joann's or cutting or at the fabric stores, because they've worked there and with these people for so long, they pick that knowledge up and they can essentially
Mm-hmm.
pass it on to customers. So like, don't be afraid to ask people at the fabric stores, being like, do you have any recommendations for this? And like, you can describe your project. Usually, a lot of them love to hear about your projects too, because you're at a fabric store. They're all dress nerds pretty much at this point.
So they're probably like, I want to hear about what you're doing because it
Yep.
will sound awesome.
Oh yeah. No, I used to work at the Joann's here back when it was Diamond. It was like my second job in high school. And oh, high school was a long time ago.
I know, right?
Oh, I know. I feel so old just thinking about it. I'm just like, oh, you younger kids. I'm only in my mid-20s and I feel so old. But yeah, no, I used to work at the Joann's and I learned so much just by working there. That's how I learned fabric types, the stitches, little tricks and tidbits that you wouldn't be able to learn by a self-learning. So I that's one of my things. I just recommend talking with them. They love to hear the stories. They love to be asked the questions. Just yeah.
And sewing seems almost like it's becoming a lost art a little bit.
Yeah, it kind of is. I've met so many people who don't know how to like just even like the basics of like fixing a button or um fixing like a little hole in the seam lines of like a hoodie or something. They just nobody knows how to do it. They don't know what needle types or thread or how to do anything, and it's kind of sad. Um,
Mm.
because it's so much cheaper to just get you're just gonna have to match the thread, honestly. If you're that lazy, you don't have to for like fixing a button. It's so much cheaper to just buy a small thing of thread than rebuying the same pair of pants or shirt.
Speaking of, you mentioned needle types. I'm guessing along with fabric and thread, you also need like a needle. So with the various types of fabrics out there, do you use, is there like different needles? Or
Oh yeah,
is
no,
it just
definitely. Yeah, so it depends on if you're freehanding or if you're using a machine, but even machines have different needle types. And those will be listed and usually color coded, at least the ones that I have a singer. Um, those will be color coded, and that will tell you what type of material this needle is best for. The more light the material, the thinner the needle is going to be. And again, same thing. If it's thicker, the needle will be thicker as well. So definitely, like if you're using satin, you don't want to use a needle that's meant for like faux leather or fleece. Even there's a lot. Whereas if you're freehanding, usually you're gonna want to base this. That one's a little bit more difficult to judge. I recommend looking up a guide on that one. I don't 100% know on that one. But if you're freehanding based on where you thread the needle, that the top hole, that will tell you what kind of material it's best for. But that's something that's not really well known, and usually you have to look it up sometimes. But then you've also got your embroidery needles, your leather needles, and just there's a lot. But usually they're pretty good about on the back of the packaging of the needles telling you what material is best for. So you're safe in that regards.
Hey, do do patterns ever tell you like, oh, hey, you're gonna work with this fabric, you'll probably need this needle, or do they just kind of like go, oh, you need this fabric, you know the needles?
Yeah, pretty much. It just goes in the patterns will just tell you what fabric is recommended for these projects. Does not mean you have to follow the pattern or not. You need to follow the pattern, but not the fabric choice. So, but definitely like the needles, you're gonna want to read the back and kind of figure out like, okay, what kind of needle do I need? There are some that are supposed to be like all purpose. If you're using any, those are great for your standard fabrics. Anything super thick and dense like fleece or again like faux leathers, I recommend getting a heavy duty needle for those. And it's the same price as your regular needle, so you're not spending extra for something a little bit heavy duty.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so another question, another back to fabric a little bit. Are there, well, like most of what I know about fabric is very, very limited. Like, and I'm learning more from you and also more from my mom as I've been making masks with her and learning how to use the sewing machine she's had since forever. But is there ever times where you're gonna mix fabrics, like you're gonna like use two fabrics right next to each other? And if so, what are some tips and tricks of doing that?
Okay. Yeah, there are instances where people have done that to kind of create an illusion that it's two layered. You'll see that more on historical gowns, whereas the centerpiece will be like, let's just go white satin. But in the photo, it looks like she's wearing a white satin like undershirt and then we'll just do like a black cotton over top or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so in a lot of instances to kind of cheat if you don't want to wear layers, because I do know some cosplayers wear these in hot weather, so they will do that trick of making it look like it's double layered, but it's just two pieces sewn together to give that illusion. So there are instances where people have done that. I think I've done that a few times myself here as well. Yes, I have sewn cotton onto leather to make it look like that.
Oh,
That one definitely go slow when you're sewing. because the friction's going to be a bit weird. You're going to want to make sure you're lining up. Grain line. That's what it's called, a grain line. You want to make sure you're lining up your grain lines, which is something you will learn in patterns as well. It'll tell you how to actually read what a grain line is.
Okay.
And that will be, grain lines are very confusing, but it's essentially.
Okay, because I was about to ask, what's a grain line?
I don't know how to describe it. Shoot, I can't think of like on the best way to describe a grain line, but whenever you're looking at fabric and you see like you'll see like how it's weaved together, the lines pretty much, and then you'll see if you pull it and you stretch it, you can see, if you're not used to working with fabric, this is gonna sound like crazy talk.
I'm like, I have my shirt with me right now, and I'm like pulling my shirt apart a little bit. So is it like seeing those little, like the lines, the cross stitches? So like if the shirt started fraying, you would kind of see the grain lines on it?
I believe so. Let me see. Okay, here we go. I just looked at the exact definition, so hopefully this will help you guys understand it better. But it says here, grain line is essentially the weave of the fabric, which direction the threads are running. There's straight grain, lengthwise grain, the threads going parallel to the selvage of the fabric, the uncut edges that are bound so that you do not unravel. But yeah, that's the definition pretty much. So that will tell you like which, some patterns will say like which direction they want the grain line to go. This will again prevent fraying, as well as if you're lining up different fabrics, you're probably going to want that to match as well. So it's important that you kind of figure out what direction your grain line is. And that's easy just by I guess I shouldn't say easy. If you can get someone who knows about grain lines to show you how to identify the grain lines, because that one's a little bit more complicated. Some patterns, especially the ones like the easy to sew, usually are pretty good about helping you identify the grain line. But I know if it's some satins and whatnot, could be hard, especially stretchy fabrics can be hard to identify the grain line.
I was just thinking leather does not have grain lines.
Oh yeah, no, if it's leather, good luck. Leather's a whole other ballgame.
Yeah. No, the more I hear about sewing, the more it's like, it seems very simple. And it is on the surface. You take thread and needle and material and you go sewy, 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 and you have joined material. It is when you move beyond that concept that's where it gets complicated.
Yeah. It's honestly, it's not as complicated as it sounds. It's just little tidbits that the more complicated the outfit or garment or whatever it is you're making, that's where it gets a little bit more complicated. Masks, you don't need all the tips and tricks. You just need to double layer and make sure your measurements are accurate. Well, to a fault anyways. I know mine aren't.
Yeah. They're a little bit easier to smudge.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm thinking of it kind of like knitting. Knitting for me is very easy. I can do it. And it's like I can do the basic knitting pattern. I can make it all nice and straight and all that. And it's like, it's when you start adding in like extra tricks to make it look fancy. Those are easy to do. It's just remembering your pattern and how to do it.
Yeah,
so I'm
exactly.
guessing sewing is... Oh, continue. Sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
So I'm thinking sewing is kind of the same thing. It's like, so you have your basic stitch made with needles, and you basically start from there. And once you start either using different material, and a different needle, that's when things start getting complicated. And it's not complicated as in hard, it's just there's more things you need to pay attention to.
Yeah, exactly. What's funny is I can't knit. Knitting to me is like trying to speak German. Yeah, which yeah, it's funny. I cannot read a knitting pattern to save my life, or crocheting patterns. I can't do it. I just, which is funny because I can read, you know, fabric patterns. I can identify grain lines and do all this other stuff for sewing, but knitting, nope. Don't even get me started. So I admire that fact that that you know you and other people are able to do that, because I can't.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to trick up on me.
Yay! I know something. Yeah.
You know what's also funny is I've heard like there are some seamstresses who actually learn knitting so they can actually combine the two, which is a skill in itself.
I'm just thinking about that.
Yeah, I've had a friend actually. He knits, and he's offered a couple times to knit if I need like certain pieces for a garment, because there were some like historical ones we were looking at that had some like really very intricate knit details, whether it be like a shawl or a top piece of a dress that's knitted. Which if you've ever seen, like there's like the knitted bathing suits. The top part is knitted, whereas underneath it, though, is just solid fabric. Yeah, the knitted bathing suits were a trend. I don't know if they still are. I don't see why, because chlorine in knit, or you know, yarn, just I don't think it mixes.
I'm thinking it's one of those things that you wear, but you do not swim in.
Probably. I don't see the point of that, but you know.
To each their own.
Exactly. I mean, I'm sure it makes great for a cute photo shoot, but those suckers are expensive. Oh my gosh. I'm just like, for that itty bitty piece that ain't gonna hold, you know, my tatas, it's not gonna hold those things. I'm not gonna pay $40 for one of those. No, thank you. I'm good.
Yeah.
But yeah, those things they're a good example of some knitters who actually like to combine their sewing with their knitting. As weird as that one is, but you good?
Yeah, I'm just wrapping my mind around. I now have knitted bikinis on the brain, and that's just like no.
Yeah.
Again, to each their own, and if anyone out there really likes those, I'm sure they look lovely on you. I'm just wrapping my head around it.
Yeah. It's I don't get it. I think it's again one of those things you do like photo shoots in, and that's about it. But yeah, which is a shame. Some of them are really cute, but they're not meant for big busted people. They're not. I've had a couple companies try to advertise it, and I'm looking, they're like, oh yeah, you know, this is great for, you know, those who are, you know, a little bit bigger busted. And I'm looking and I'm just like, that ain't gonna hold anything up. That string is gonna snap.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So back to the topic at hand. Fabrics.
As we get
okay, so people do combine it would make sense to put the various fabrics together. I'm guessing then you also have to take into like your needles. You'd also have to take into account like thread and needles when you're doing two different fabrics together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know there's I'm sorry, I have something just keeps falling in my eye. I blame this new mascara. Yeah, no, when you're combining two different materials together, that is something you're going to want to take into account. The thicker, if one material is much thicker than the other, you'll need to think like, okay, like again, like the example that I was using faux leather with cotton. I had to take that into consideration with the needle I was using. I went ahead and I tried out two different needles, and found that the heavy duty one works just fine with the cotton, thankfully. So I was able to use that. But if I was using, say, like a satin and leather, that's where things probably get a little bit more tricky. You're going to need to experiment to see if the needle will work just fine with the two, or if the needle is going to cause too much damage to the satin to be able to use it. And whereas, because there's also your stitch size and density. So a smaller stitch and it's much closer together can be a little bit denser. You're probably going to have to play around with your stitches much more than if you were just using your standard stitch for making a shirt or something. You'll have to kind of play with that, those numbers around a bit.
Okay.
But there are instances where actually you have to like line your material. So you know like how dresses have those two layers usually. So that's called a lining. And there is actually material called lining material. It's much thinner, but it's still pretty dense. And so you don't have to really worry about too much about how that's going to react to your other materials, as it is made to be a lining. So you don't have to worry about using that with satin or cotton. It's kind of made for that. It's just not as pretty.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I don't know much about fabric, so I don't know if there's like any myths out there about fabrics.
I'm not too sure, honestly. I haven't really been told like any controversial things about fabrics. It's just, oh, no, there is one thing. You can never go into a fabric store and buy just one thing. It's the same like Target. You know how there's that joke of like you go in a Target for everything, for like one thing and you come out with like 50 different things minus the thing you actually needed. There is that. I know there's sometimes like you're pretty good at self-control. Even if you do walk out with just that one thing, you still spend half an hour or an hour or two even still in the store. There's no way you're walking out of that store without browsing like every other aisle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that's crafters in general. We just walk in for the yarn. But ooh, look at that aisle and look at that aisle. Ooh, hey, there's knitting needles down that aisle.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't tell you the number of times me and some of my friends will go, and I will specifically drag my friend with me to the fabric store because I get very anxious when I have other people shopping with me. So I won't spend as much time browsing the aisles. And I bring them along specifically for that purpose. I'm like, okay, if they are here, I will not spend 20 minutes debating between two different fabrics and then not get either of them. I will either condemn myself to buying one of them or neither of them. But I won't take as long because I'm just like, oh, my friend's here. I don't want to take up too much of their time. They're already, going out of their way to come with me to the store. So if you know yourself well enough to be able to do that, do it. Have a travel buddy with you to the fabric store.
Yeah. So since we've had a lot of tangents this past episode, quick review on everything about fabrics. So cotton is considered like the easy, most versatile of the fabrics. If you're learning, it was recommended that you start with that. Satins and silks take time, practice, and patience. they're probably for a more advanced sewer and or someone who has guidance and someone helping them. And then we were talking about the grain of the fabric, which is something it's not easy to explain. It's something it's the weave of the fabric.
Yeah, you'll see like the lines in your material, like your hoodies and whatnot. When you pull the sleeve apart, you'll see that those lines, and that will be your grain line.
And if you're working with two different materials, make sure that lines up. Otherwise, I'm guessing you'll get issues because it'll start trying to fray since it's not working together.
There is that. There's also usually the grain line will indicate, if it's a stretchy material, it'll indicate which way the stretch will be.
So
if you're working with
important.
Yeah, which is something we didn't mention, but that if you're working with a stretchy material, you're gonna want to make sure you're before you sew anything, as you're laying it down to get pinned together, just double check which way it stretches, because if you need it to stretch this way and you sew it together and it stitches and you goes this way, it's not gonna help you.
No.
Oh, we got photos.
Yay! Yes.
Thank you, Casey, for the impromptu photos. Yeah, I probably should have posted
that's awesome.
I didn't even think about grain lines until we started talking about it. So yeah, that's a really good indicator. They're not always super accurate on the bolts. A bolt is what it's as you see, like one of the photos, the roll that it's on.
Mm-hmm.
It can be a roll of a little thingy, cardboard thing. Usually,
at Joann's, they're the little cardboard inserts in the fabric that are like squares.
Yep. Yeah, those are called bolts. But anything is called a bolt that the fabric is essentially being held onto.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, usually that grain line, like it shows in the photo, it's down and then the stretch will be across. Usually, there's been a couple instances where that hasn't always been accurate. That's usually because it's a different seller. Some of the designer fabrics, I've had instances where it doesn't stretch that way; it'll stretch the other direction. I'm just like, what's okay? But usually, like if you need to test it, you can always unravel the bolt just like a little bit. The companies usually don't mind at all because you got to test it. But you can unroll it for a little bit, let it hold, like again, look at the photo there, and you can test that stretch, find the grain line, and then also look at the material. As usually when they're folded onto bolts, they're going to be inside out pretty much. So if it has a pattern, the pattern's going to be folded in. So you only see the back side of the fabric, which is known as the wrong side.
Wait, what?
Yeah, so that's
there's a right and a wrong side?
Yes. So you'll actually this is something else you learn in patterns. So in this instance, I've got some fabric here. But as you can see, so it is a pattern material. And I've got this, nice green pattern here. And then on the back, this is known as the wrong side. This is the side that you don't see the pattern. And then this is the right side. Same thing with like satin. Satin, this one side will be shiny, one side will be matte. And these are known as the right and wrong sides. When you're sewing, you're usually going to sew it on the wrong side. Otherwise, if you sew it on the right side, when you unfold it, you're not going to be able to see your pretty pattern. But also, I've had instances where I've actually had it to where I wanted the wrong side to show because I liked that side more than the right side. Okay. So there are instances like that. It's a lot of information. Oh.
Yeah. So to those out there who are sewing their own cosplays from scratch, power to you. And if you just want to store buy it, no one will blame you. And those who do, they deserve a swift kick to the keister.
Yeah, you come find me, and I will gladly, commit murder or whatnot, I didn't say that. I didn't say that on the internet. Shh. Which apparently, I'm pretty intimidating in person. We have a couple people who apparently are scared of me at SenjiCon. Which, if you know me, I'm not a scary person. They catch me, early in the morning, resting bitch face going. I haven't had my coffee yet. You've seen me, Rebecca. You know.
I've known you so long now that it just kind of goes.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, those who make fun of people for buying costumes don't know the struggle. They probably don't even, I shouldn't say they don't even wear costumes. They assume so much. They don't realize how difficult all this information can be. It seems daunting. It really does. But it's something you learn as you go. And don't be, yeah. If you can find someone to even just show you just the basics of basics, I guarantee it'll make it much simpler.
Joanne, before COVID struck, Joanne was they would be doing basic sewing classes, which probably don't help a lot with cosplaying, but it at least introduces you to the sewing machine, the fabric, needles, the thread, and all of that. And that's like, I swear that's the first hurdle. Is just, how do I use the sewing machine?
Yeah. A lot of people that I talked to, like, they always get so embarrassed. They're just like, yeah, I learned sewing by making a, what's that sheet called? You put a pillowcase. And like they get very embarrassed or like ashamed that's how they were introduced to sewing. And I'm like, no, pillowcases, I can't make pillowcases. Even though I've made ball gowns of one. I'm sure I could figure out how to make a pillowcase. I haven't, nor have I bothered learning. But honestly, like, learning to make a pillowcase is still a feat in itself. You learned how to cut the fabric, which is also, can be challenging at times. You learned how to measure and then pin it and sew it. And if it's staying together, hey, there you go. That's the basics, what you need. You don't have to be ashamed that's how
everyone starts from somewhere. Most knitters I know, the first thing they knit is a dishcloth because it's a basic square. You start from the bottom and you work your way up.
Exactly. And you're just getting introduced to it, so you don't have to go into learning sewing and the first thing you sew is a skirt. It doesn't have to be. You're starting out. Get the fundamentals. That's because those fundamentals will carry you so far.
I think my mom actually started me on like scraps. She gave me like a bunch of scraps she had and said, "Here, sew these together," and just literally had me going every which way on them. And it's like by the end of it, it's like I don't have much of anything, but I've got 2 pieces of scrap that have a lot of thread in them.
Yep. That's actually one thing a lot of us seamstresses do. It's recommended is you take your scrap fabric and you actually test out you test out like how the sewing the material is going to be, especially with your first time using it. Just take like a small strip.
Yeah.
Okay.
She called it testing the tension of the fabric and the thread.
Yeah. Each fabric you're gonna if you ever look at like the settings on your sewing machines, it'll let you alter the tension and the size of the stitching, and that each fabric requires a different tension, a different length, and some need like tighter tension and whatnot, and that's something you have to play with. Otherwise, like one way I know like my tension's too loose is when I'm sewing satin, it'll usually the machine jams like right away, and then you just get a whole bunch of when you pull it, you just get a whole bunch of thread at under the bottom of the fabric piece, and that's just because it was too loose, so the thread just kind of clumped up and then immediately clogged the machine. And so that's how you know, like, okay, I need to adjust my settings. And each material is going to require something a little bit different. I don't have it down to a science. I think some ladies do, or some seamsters do. But it's one of those things, like, if you have...
Yeah.
Okay.
The people who have it down to a science are probably the people who've been working at it for several decades and have been doing it like either as their job or as a very serious hobby for many, many years.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Those who quilt, I know for sure. I know so many quilters that I've met. Oh my gosh, they've got it down to a science. I'm just like, whew. I don't know how, because usually, like, they only work with, like, cotton usually, but still somehow they're just, good Lord. Watching their process is amazing. Like, I know I've seen so many younger generations, scoff at the idea of quilting. And I'm like, do you know how much process and pain it goes through to see those suckers? It's like watching someone build a ball gown. And it's such an amazing experience, honestly, watching the ladies start and finish. If they even finish, if you're there long enough to finish it, those suckers take months, if not years, because the more intricate. And I'm just like, no wonder those things are expensive.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're getting really close to end time, so let's do a quick review, which we started a bit ago and kind of got distracted. Tangents! So fabric is both simple and complex. You've got to look at your easy fabrics, which are cotton, because they're versatile. They are much more malleable, so they're easier to work with in general. They're your all-purpose fabrics, basically. All the way to satins and silks, which are not problem children necessarily, but they definitely have minds of their own and will do their own thing, and you would just work around them. Don't forget about grain size.
No, grain lines.
Grain lines, yes. Keep those in mind, just because you're going to have, if the fabric stretches, you want to make sure that the stretch follows the direction you want it when you are wearing the clothing you are making. That's important.
Yeah.
Keep an eye out on, if you're mixing fabrics, what your needle and thread should be, because you're going to have to, especially if you're doing like faux leather next to cotton, they are going to act very differently and going to demand different needles and threads. Also, as simple as this is, it takes a lot of practice and it is complex. There are tricks of the trade that you only learn by doing. So if it takes you several years to get this down, there are people who've been in the industry of the seamstressing for many, many years, and they are the masters. Listen to them. Ask for advice is basically the advice I would give.
Yeah.
I think that's everything. I know we went off on a lot of tangents this episode.
We did. We didn't even cover like all the fabric types, honestly. There's so many, because you've even got your blend, your different types of blends of fabrics. So honestly, like, the best thing you could probably do is just go to a fabric store and explore. Spend, a good hour or two just looking at the different fabrics, feeling them, seeing how they drape. So, just hold it up and let it fall and just watch it. And just different things like that. It's just honestly probably the best thing you could do when you're starting out. Like, it seems daunting, and like, as you mentioned earlier, just talking to someone who, if just being like, okay, how do I start? And usually, again, you can talk to anybody at like our local Joann's here. The people at the cutting counter actually have fair bit of knowledge. And if that specific employee you're talking with doesn't, you could even be like, okay, do you know someone who does here? And like maybe they could give me pointers. And 9 out of 10 times, they will be like, oh, let me go grab this one lady for you real quick. Or they can be like, hey, come in next week. She's usually here in the evenings or something.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
A lot of it is just internal knowledge of practicing and trying and failing and trying again. And learning lessons from your failures and your successes.
Yes.
Because yeah, there's a lot going on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, that pretty much wraps up the episode. If you have any questions that we didn't get to, feel free to send an email to the email below in the description. And Deborah will do her best to help answer that question, or we may put it into a later episode if it's a really, really good question and we're like, ooh, we should have covered that.
Yes.
Yes. The plan is to get us back onto the normal broadcasting schedule. So we're going to have another episode next week on Saturday at 2:15. So happy cosplay, everybody, and happy Saturday. Have a good day. Enjoy the sunshine because it looks like we are going to have some sun for a little bit. So yes. I hope you have a good weekend and see you later.
Have a good night, guys. Bye.
Bye.